time with us and put this together. Really looking forward to it. It's such an interesting topic. And I know you have a lot of background in this. You've been doing this for many years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see you, and then you can share your own screen if you'd like.
I just want to interject and let people know, hi and welcome. We're going to go over a couple little housekeeping items. One is we're going to let the presenter do his presentation. If you have a question during the presentation, you're more than welcome to type it into chat. Otherwise, we can wait till the end and we can call on you if you have a question. You can raise your hand or you can type it into chat and I can call on you to read your question out loud. All right, thank you.
And just so people know, I cannot see the chat, so one of you two moderators will have to, if you, as I said before, we went live with this. If you think a question is worth asking in the middle, feel free to interrupt, but otherwise. Are we ready for me?
I think we are, Adam. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for, so I've been doing this kind of work for the Philadelphia Water Department for the past 22 years now. It's a little scary. Basically, I've been researching the history of the city's watershed and sewers. So basically the drainage of the city and also the water supply. We used to have a water historian, but I've outlived her. She died about 5 years ago. So, you know, I'm the last historian standing at the Philadelphia Water Department for the moment. So we're here. I'm going to be talking about a piece of the Darby Creek watershed. This is a map off your own website, but I actually retitled it. The Water Department has been calling this the Darby Cobbs watershed for years because they were trying to appeal to both creek constituencies, and that's just wrong. It's the Darby Creek watershed. Cobbs Creek is a sub-watershed of that. So I actually retitled this map for the purposes of this, you know, and that probably sounds a little bit wonky to you. So I'll try not to be that nerdy from now on. Although that's what you're here for, right? For a water nerd. So this is a good map that shows the Darby Creek watershed is about 77 square miles. If I feel.
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
I don't see your screen.
You don't see my screen.
No. Have you clicked on the share screen at the bottom?
I thought I did. Now I did. Now do you see it?
Yes, there it is. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No
were you just seeing me?
I just saw you. Yep.
Does everybody see me too? Or can I? Is everybody going to see me, or are they just seeing the screen?
Yeah, no, okay. I think we can all see your map now, and you're on the side there.
And if there's no way to get that bar off the top of the thing, is there? That's okay. Just I have to be careful with the cursor. Every time I move the cursor over here, the bar is going to come down and hide something. So anyway, so this is the map I was talking about. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but the basics of the Darby Creek watershed are that it's about 77 square miles, about 500,000 people, about half of which live in the Cobbs Creek part of the watershed, which is about a little less than a third of the watershed, about 22 square miles. Lots of different tributaries. You have, it goes all the way, covers 3 counties and more than 30 municipalities, which of course, when you're trying to do any watershed planning is an issue when you have all those different governmental agencies and municipal governments trying to coordinate. One of the problems with planning anything in Pennsylvania is all the different governments. So you have all the way up into Chester County with the headwaters and down to where most of the drainage ends up in the Hines Wildlife Refuge, swamplands down there. I'm mostly going to be talking about the Cobbs Creek part. And I just put this map in because there's a lot of different ways to look at a watershed, depending on what jurisdiction you are. Here's a planning map from Delaware County, and they're only concerned about Delaware County. They're not concerned about much of the Philadelphia part, any of the Philadelphia part, which is in the tan color, or the Montgomery part of the watershed, or the Chester County. They just care about Delaware County. But this is an interesting map because it shows all the different features of different things that are going on, and some of the substreams and the types of land and that kind of thing. So as I said, I'm going to focus on the tan area here in the rest of the talk, the Cobbs Creek watershed, which is, Cobbs Creek is the western boundary of Philadelphia, at least part of the western boundary. And here's talk about different ways to portray a watershed. This is the Cobbs Creek watershed. It looks like it's all on fire or something. I don't know, but it's a way of showing the elevation. The darkest, it's a pretty bad way, if you ask me, of showing the elevation. You know, the darker it gets, the lower the land, and then the higher land, 435 feet in the upper part of the watershed, down to 25 feet, probably right about where Cobbs Creek enters Darby Creek, right below Darby and Colwyn boroughs. So a better depiction of the watershed is this one, I think. It's something we did a while ago when we were doing a river conservation plan for Cobbs Creek, and I was doing a presentation on the history of it, showing some of the different municipal entities that are in Cobbs Creek, including the 3 different counties. And part of that original work we did was basically to create these three maps that are sort of it's intuitive. Anybody who thinks about development in an urban area or a suburban area as part of Cobbs Creek watershed is near an urban area, this is not going to be a surprise to you. But we had some interns go through old maps and atlases looking for land use and then plotting it on a map. And so in the 1870 range, we see most of the watershed is open space. And by residential, what I mean is not just individual houses, but densely developed residences, row houses, or little towns and villages. So you have mostly, in 1870, you have mostly green. Then the red, the residential, starts creeping in across, reaching the edge of West Philadelphia, more or less, but still not much out into the suburbs, except maybe up in Montgomery County. And then by 1958, 1971, and those date ranges are the maps that we used to cover the whole watershed. Then you have mostly residential. So very, very, very densely residential watershed. Very impervious, a lot of impervious surface, which of course creates problems, which we can talk about later. It's not really part of what I'm going to be talking about directly. So to go back to the beginning, over the years, I've collected a lot of pictures of various farms and rural uses, rural areas of Cobbs Creek. So Frank Taylor was a well-known artist in Philadelphia who did a lot of sketches of historic sites, but he also knew the historic value of going out into West Philadelphia as the neighborhood was changing at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, and sketching some of these old farms that he knew were going to be eventually just paved over as the neighborhood was developed with residential row houses and twin houses. And there's also various photographers who did the same thing, documenting some of these old farmhouses. And I just love the names of some of the old streets. Rabbit Lane, which doesn't exist anymore, and Grays Lane. They were off the grid, and I'll show a map that shows Rabbit Lane on it in a few minutes. Now the city is getting back to allowing chickens again, but this was not a backyard, row house backyard with chickens. This was a full farm on Lansdowne Avenue. actually in the Indian Creek Valley, which is a tributary of the Cobbs, which I'll talk about, that runs through Philadelphia. And here's a Taylor watercolor of this house and farm, and the address was given here as 60th in Baltimore, but since there were no streets had been built in this area yet, that's just sort of a guesstimate. All the streets were laid out, but they were just paper streets. They were not on the ground, built on the ground yet. Here's the same house in a photograph, and that's not actually 1880. It's probably more like 1900. Gives a different address, but sort of in the same vicinity. You can see the windmill in this farm and in this farm, and if it weren't for the row of houses behind this farm in 1911. You would think that this was somewhere out in Chester County, but instead it's sort of a last farmhouse, one of the last farmhouses standing in West Philadelphia at this point, ready to be, is when the family is ready to sell off the land and divide it up into row house blocks. It will be, the house will be gone. There was a good amount of industry along Cobbs Creek. I'll show some pictures of some mills in Indian Creek later, but along the main branch of Cobbs Creek, you had a whole gunpowder industry up in Haverford Township. This is by 1870 that had gone by the wayside, and the ruin of this mill was basically a picturesque picnic spot and a place for artists and photographers, early photographers, to go and take pictures. Then a little farther downstream, more or less, well, actually in Millborn Borough now, but then part of Upper Darby, you have the Millborn Mills, which was started out as a small grist mill grinding grain using water power from a dam upstream and a mill race that carried water down, but eventually became a huge flour producer that shipped flour by rail all over the country. Here's a 1870 map showing the Millborn Mills and the long mill race. As you can see my cursor here, carrying water from above the dam and then down through the mills when it would have been a water powered mill. This newer mill would have been certainly steam powered or some other source of power, not using water to turn grindstones at that point. Then about where Marshall Road comes in, you would have had several factories where Naylor's Run comes in from through Upper Darby and down joins Cobbs Creek, flowed through the Cardington Mills, and then also you had a mill race carrying water through the Wolfenden and Shores. Both of them textile mills, probably dyeing and bleaching fabric, and certainly in the 1870s when this industrial survey was done, they would have been dumping their waste right into these tail races, as they called them, coming out of the mills, which would have then dyed the water of Cobbs Creek, whatever color dye they were using in the mill. And in Angora, you had the Angora Cotton Mills, which is a big factory, gave its name to that neighborhood of Philadelphia, and also the West End Mills. These mills often employed children, and in these industrial surveys, they would list the number of employees, including the children, by 20 boys and 30 girls and things like that. And again, you can see the mill race coming through here in the map above, just at the right side of the map. So there were a lot of institutional buildings and institutions in the Cobbs Creek watershed. I'm not going to try to show you a picture of every school and every church and every institution. But just this, I like this picture of the Birds Orphan Asylum, which was right across in Upper Darby, right across Cobbs Creek at 63rd Market. I think there's a big community garden there now, more or less on the side of that. Would have been right across from the Millborn Mills. And for those of you I didn't mention, but if you're trying to locate the Millborn Mills, not clear. If you remember the old Sears building, it's basically where the Millborn train station, the L stop is. A lot of the green space on that on the progression of maps that I showed, where it went from green to red, the remaining green space, a lot of it in the Cobbs Creek watershed and in Delaware County in general, I think, is, besides the parks, it's either golf courses or it's cemeteries. So here we have a picture of Arlington Cemetery. There's Naylor's Run is the tributary that flows through Upper Darby is on the right in the upper right corner. And then you can see these old atlases are actually very detailed. And they show little spring houses from this little tributary going into Naylor's Run. These little buildings and little outbuildings and little marshy areas where the streams start. So, and already you can see in 1909 that part of this Conway estate called Upper Lansdowne is the part of 105 acres is being subdivided, and a few houses have already been built. Mount Moriah is another big cemetery in the area, and if you haven't been there lately, it's very odd because it's gotten so overgrown that you now have headstones in the woods, and they've been trying to clear it out and reclaim the cemetery, but there's still areas where you can look into woods and over sort of third growth trees or second growth trees in the cemetery and see gravestones there. If I was going to be buried in a cemetery, that would be my ideal, is to be buried in among trees, not just in a underneath lawn. So, but so there was a lot of pressure to develop in the beginning of the 20th century, late 19th century, to start developing the Cobbs Creek watershed. And two things that contributed to that were the construction of the Mill Creek sewer, Mill Creek in West Philadelphia. I'll show a picture of that and explain that a little more. And also the completion of the Market Frankfurt L that provided easy and fast transportation out to the western edge of the city and even into eastern Delaware County. So once those two projects were completed around 1900, 1910, there was a big push for development west of the area of Mill Creek, which had been impeding development. You can see here is West Philadelphia. This Westchester Plank Road here is Market Street. And Mill Creek ran from about 43rd Street up to Overbrook train station, which used to be over the brook that was Mill Creek, and now it's over a sewer. That's the Mill Creek sewer. So the valley of Mill Creek basically stopped development, and until the creek was put into a sewer and the valley was leveled out, development, at least to the density that had happened east of the creek, couldn't really proceed to the west. Here you see the Cobbs Creek over here on the western side of this map. So, talking about putting a stream into a sewer begs the question, why do that? And so these next few slides are part of a talk that I give that's, it's an hour in itself. So I'm only going to be able to touch on this, briefly. Otherwise, this would be all I talk about. But to explain why streams are put into sewers, I like to show these three maps first. One shows all the streams that used to be in Philadelphia, and you can see that the streams outside the city and the configuration of the streams and then a number of streams sort of is the same as what used to be in the city. We drew this map based on an 1843 map of Philadelphia County, which was the most detailed map we had of streams and also some other sources. So this is what we used to have in Philadelphia, the number of streams, and this is how many streams are left. So the loss here of streams, or at least the bearing of the streams, amounts to probably 200 miles of streams. And that includes little spring runs and things, but also some fairly large streams as well. 200 miles of streams are missing from this map. And where did they go? They went into the sewer system to provide drainage for the neighborhoods of the city as they grew around those stream valleys. And and you know, you can see that there's 3,000 miles of sewers, and 2/3 of them are combined sewers, which are the sewers that carry both stormwater and sewage still today, and still overflow into the various rivers and streams in the city, and cause pollution problems. But that's another hour lecture, that one. So I'll move on from that. But we can I can direct people or whatever you want at the end. You know, if people want more information on any of this, I can give you ways to find out more. So you have this the reasons that streams were put into sewers, and the reason, well, even before streams were put into sewers, the ground had to be leveled out. When you're building a city, you don't want water to pool up in any one place. So you have to make sure your streets are sloped in a way that the water will drain away, even if it's just on the surface. But then when you add streams to the mix, streams that meander, especially when you have a gridded city, when a meandering stream and a gridded city don't really work together very well. So streams early on were put underground because of health concerns, because they believed that a polluted stream that smelled bad was causing disease. They didn't understand about bacteria. They thought that bad odors would get into the air, and that's what was causing epidemics such as typhoid fever and cholera and other diseases. A health hazard as well as an eyesore, and so as early as 1764, Dock Creek, which had been polluted early in the city's history, was covered over in the old city, and other creeks continued. You know, up until the 1940s, the city was burying streams in combined sewers. So, and another reason to bury streams, especially some of the smaller streams that may not have been polluted, but they were getting in the way of real estate development. If you think about a grid, if you want to grid out your property in nice little rectangles like most of Philadelphia and even a lot of the eastern part of Delaware County is, you don't want to have a stream to deal with. You want to put that stream under the grid of streets in a pipe, and that way all the property can be developed. And by encouraging real estate development, the city was increasing their tax revenues. And often, if even in a big project, converting a stream into a sewer, they could pay that back with increased tax revenues from the new houses built in that valley in 5 or 10 years. And in the higher parts, as the city expanded, especially into some of these deeper valleys, this is Northwest Philadelphia, this is Wissahickon Creek, which of course is still on the surface, but with some of these other streams, this is Wingahocken Creek, which you may never have heard of, but is now completely buried except for a tiny piece. In order to drain those neighborhoods, the cheapest way to do that was to use stream valleys, which you want your sewage to always flow by gravity, and so the streams had already cut the channel by gravity to either to the rivers or to another stream. In the case of Wingahocken Creek, it goes to Frankfort Creek. So by building your sewers in those valleys, you're doing it much more cheaply and much more efficiently. And then by burying those streams and filling up the valleys, they're not leveling them completely, but by taking the very steep parts out of them, you're opening up all that land for residential development. So that's the 5-minute version of an hour-long talk, but I hope that makes sense. So just to give pictures showing how the cutting and filling and the leveling was done, because part of the burying streams was also leveling the valley. And when you're leveling a valley, you have to fill it with something, and usually what you're doing is you're cutting away the high ground to fill in the low ground. So this is the corner of 44th and Walnut Street, and all of this is going to be cut away and leveled. And you can see that not just the houses are going to go, but all the vegetation, all the trees and things are going to have to go. So in this process of urbanization in the 19th century in Philadelphia and other cities, especially in in the rural parts of Philadelphia. It basically went from rural to urban. There was no suburban interlude. There was just you had a farm, and then within a few years, once it was cut down, once it was leveled and the streets were put in, then you had row houses. So this is a photograph of the same house, probably about 1880 or so, showing this house. And you can see the street being, this is probably 43rd Street in West Philadelphia. This is probably Locust Street, looking west. And you can see the process of cutting that land down. And as you can see on the street, it's not leveling it, it's just taking the steep parts out. And as they're doing this, they're putting in the street, they're harvesting any stone. If they come across a stone off crop, they save that and sell it to the people who are going to build the houses in that valley afterwards. So in this particular case, where the cutting was being done at 44th and Locust, they're carting the material over to build up the street embankments over the Mill Creek at 40, just a few blocks away. Actually, if they have to cart material more than 500 feet, they actually charge more, because they were doing all of this cutting and filling and moving the material with people with picks and shovels, filling the carts, then the carts driving to the low ground and dumping it, and then more men or people there spreading it around. And these carts held about a third of a cubic yard, and in the 1880s, 1890s, the city was filling street embankments to the tune of 1 or 2 million cubic yards a year. So that's a lot of little cartloads being dragged back and forth. Of course, they were doing this with other mechanized equipment as well, but a lot of the work was done with these little, what they call one-horse tip carts or dump carts. And so this mill here is going to be buried, so it's being demolished. Also, the creek that it used to be next to is now in a sewer, so it's sort of obsolete at that point. And so here you see a photograph. Here's the same mill a little bit earlier as they're demolishing, as they're building the sewer before they're filling over it. Just to show you the scale of this work, this is a 20-foot diameter pipe covering over Mill Creek, and starts out as a 7-foot pipe that in Overbrook, and it grows to capturing all the tributaries. By the time it gets down to this end, which is near the Schuylkill River, it becomes a 20-foot pipe, and then they'll eventually put 15 feet of fill on top of that pipe, and that's where the level of the street will be. So it's just a huge amount of work. This is a photograph from 1877, the earliest sewer construction photo I have. So this isn't Cobb's Creek, but it's just to give you some idea of the kind of work that would have been done. So here's a newer version of that streams map that we've created. That it's a little hard to read in its full scale, because what we've tried to do here is find all the streams that we could find names for and put those names on this map. And this is, so where we're going to be focusing now is on, here's Cobb's Creek, and you can see all the little tributaries. This again is based on that 1843 map, which I'll show some screenshots of in a few minutes. But you can see here all these little tributaries. Indian Creek is still there, but the rest of them are all gone, including Thomas Run, which I'm going to be talking about now, as an example of a stream in the Cobb's Creek watershed that's now in a sewer. So here's an 1886 map showing Cobb's Creek down at the bottom, and Florence Avenue and 58th Street. This is below Baltimore Avenue, downstream from Baltimore Avenue. The creek called Thomas Run, or on maps it's also called Amia-Seeker Creek. There was an engineer in the early 20th century who decided to rename all these streams with Native American names, even though I think they just came out of thin air. I don't know. I've never seen any maps with these names on them, but so some of the maps have that name. Some of the maps I'd like to call it Thomas Run. There's the Thomas family right here, who the stream is probably named for, but both names are on maps. This is the lower reaches as it approaches the creek. Now there's a big, I think, a 10-foot sewer that it that it empties out into Cobb's Creek, or at least what doesn't, it used to empty out. Now it goes to the sewage treatment plant, and that's part of the other talk. So, and it went all the way north of Baltimore Avenue, all the way almost to, even over Walnut Street, almost to Market Street. So a fairly large watershed, probably several square miles at least, with several branches and tributaries. And here's this Rabbit Lane and a house on Rabbit Lane. Rabbit Lane, as the city grid expanded, was vacated, as they called it. Streets were put on the map, and then they were taken off the map when they became inconvenient. And any diagonal or old road that meandered across the grid was like a meandering stream. It was not conducive to creating rectangles, as you can see here with all these little triangles here. So once the development continued, that street was gone, and then the house lots were extended over it. Of course, this house is gone along with the street it was on. Here's a picture, another Frank Taylor picture from 1899, showing another house along. He called it Amasika Creek. And then here's a photograph showing the creek running under Baltimore Avenue in West Philadelphia, 55th Street, which is the street that was built over the sewer that eventually captured the creek. And here's another view of that 55th and Baltimore intersection. And again, you can see the amount of fill that's going to be needed once the pipe is put over the stream there, how much fill is going to be needed to bring it up to the level of Baltimore Avenue over on the left. And again, you can see that all the vegetation here is going to be, the trees will be cut down and everything else will just be buried. So, creeks like this we have engineering calculation books, and they just became an engineering problem. How do we build a creek big enough? How do we build a sewer big enough to capture this creek? And how do we allow for rainfall? And you don't want it to overflow, and we want to have it not clog up, so we have to have it sloping enough so it flows constantly. So these calculation books became sort of a replacement for the natural system that had been in place for eons. On the top, you see a picture. There's a manhole there, and the ground around that manhole will be filled up to the top of the manhole. And on the bottom, there's a picture of the street embankment that's already been built up almost to the edge of Thomas Run, near Cobb's Creek. And until that stream is put into a sewer, it can't be, the street can't continue over it. And this is another picture showing the amount of fill that's needed, and the little dump carts they're still using. This is about 1902, I think. And here's the manhole, and there's the level that this is going to have to be filled to. So it's probably another 10 feet they have to get. And if that's all they're using, just those little dump carts, it's going to be years. And any of you have gone into the Philadelphia on the median line and gone through Angora and noticed sort of the weird landscapes around where there are embankments and in low areas. Some of that area was never filled in. And in some places in the city, you can still see these large manholes where the ground was never filled up to the level that the planners had thought it would eventually end up. Some of these in the Wissahickon, and actually some in the Indian Creek watershed. So these are some of the construction drawings. Here you can see the mouth of Thomas Run or Amasika Creek and the creek meandering around, and how they're going to capture it up here on the upper right, and then put it in the pipe, and then it'll flow out that way. And as they're doing that, the plan is to capture all the little springs along it, any little tributaries like this that are feeding into it. And so that way, when you fill the land, you don't have water pooling up underneath your new house lots and things, which would cause problems. And you can see on the bottom the profile looking at how deep the fill is going to be from the straight line here, which is where the street's going to be, all the way down to where the natural or the unnatural land, in the case of this street embankment already built, is. And so here's another picture of the creek approaching what is now the median line of Westchester and Philadelphia Railroad. And the creek used to run underneath that railroad trestle there, and now the trains run on the basically on the surface, on the ground. There's no trestle there at all. And so when I showed this picture to a couple of really savvy railroad historians, they had no idea where it was. I told them that this is in Angora. This is 3 miles from the city, and this is a stream that was there. So you can see that basically the ground in this valley was filled up all the way to where that trestle is. You know, the whole valley was more or less leveled out that way. And just some other pictures of this same stream. And the way I knew it was where it was. This was from a collection of a whole bunch of railroad pictures, is because it said it was captioned Angora, and also because it said 3, and that's 3. The measurement of miles on that line are from Center City. So 3 miles from Center City on this line is about Angora, and this is where this bridge was. So, but again, just thinking about that line now the valley is gone. So it's just a progression of maps showing this varying of this stream. Here you see Thomas Run and all. This is an 1843 map that I said was used as the basis of our historic streams map. So you can see all the little tributaries, even to a small stream like Thomas Run, the various diagonal and weird roads that were changed as the grid extended across here. So here is 1862, and already the engineers have gridded out all of West Philadelphia, and the entire city for that matter. So it's just a matter of time, at least for this creek, before those streets are built and the creek is put underground. And then again in 1895, the project is underway, but there's still no development there, and development is slowly creeping west. And then by 1910, there's some weird patches where private owners didn't want development, but the development just jumped right over them and into the valley of what was Thomas Run. And then by 1942, all of West Philadelphia was probably built up even by 1930, as I'll show in the last picture that I'm going to show. So I just want to talk about another example of one other creek in the Cox Creek Valley, which was Indian Creek, which those of you who are familiar with Morris Park in West Philadelphia know that Indian Creek still exists today. And that's not because the engineers didn't want to bury it. This is a sort of my crude watershed map for Indian Creek drawn on an 1871 map. There's a east branch and there's a west branch that come together about at 69th Street and Lansdowne or Haverford Avenue, and then they join together and they flow into Cox Creek above Millborn. So the East Branch has its source in Narbrook Park in Narbrook, and it's basically the source of the creek is a spring that's underneath a cul-de-sac, which seems to have be the fate of so many streams, even living streams, that we can't seem to just let their springs alone. We have to bury them and pave over them in parking lots or other things. And there were a lot of mills along Indian Creek, and various mill dams and mill races, mostly textile mills. And even by the early 20th century, some of them were ruins. This is an earlier photograph of the mill that's in ruins above. It's actually a mill called the Ruins that was built on ruins, and that's this mill. And here you can see this is 1915. This is the Indian Creek Valley. The creek is still here in the foreground, but in the background you can see 63rd Street in West Philadelphia, all built up, and other houses even closer, 68th Street, and all just waiting for this. They would, if the city had not gotten the gift of land in this valley as a park, the row houses would have swept right across this valley. Just another view showing a quarry and some old farmhouses. There were some very old original settlers here, some probably close to original, purchasers from William Penn owned part of this valley. So here's the way I use this Philadelphia Geohistory website interactive map viewer to create some of these overlays. And you can do this at home if you want, for whatever, at least in the city, within the city of Philadelphia. So here's Indian Creek, the two branches, and another odd tributary coming over there. 1843, with the various mills and various property owners. Here's 1862, where streets had been plotted over the creek. So you would think that it's just a matter of time, but this creek managed to survive long enough. By the time that Worcester Morris, one of the property owners in the Indian Creek Valley, gave the land in 1911, by that time the city had realized that it was just too expensive to build these huge pipes and put all that fill in these valleys, and that maybe it would be it was like a revelation that maybe it would be an amenity to a neighborhood to actually create a park in those valleys. It's actually cheaper to do that, to buy up the land and create a park, and also, of course, was a wonderful amenity for the people who live nearby. So this is what Morris Park looks like today. There's the two branches of Indian Creek going down into Cobb's Creek eventually. And imagine, and you can look at an aerial view of any park in the city and think this, or even in dense suburban areas like so much of Delaware County is, and think the same thing. What if this park hadn't been purchased? This development would just have continued right across this valley, and even in suburban areas that are less dense than this, often the development continues right up to the edge of the stream, which is put into a concrete channel and sort of runs between houses or under parking lots and things. So even where the streams are not put in sewers, most of the land would have been eaten up. Another good piece of news about Indian Creek is that the West Branch used to go into a sewer and then come out and join the main creek, come out of the sewer and join the main creek. Well, in the past 10 years, the water department has taken that West Branch out of the sewer and actually recreated this quite amazing natural looking new stream channel for it. So it connects now with the East Branch above where it would have originally, and then they flow in without having to go into a sewer. So it's about the only daylighting work that's been done in Philadelphia. It was able to be done because there was a park here, and there was a live stream above and a live stream below. So it's just a matter of connecting the two. So this is what West Philadelphia looks like today. Here you have 63rd Street. Here's Cobb's Creek running along the western edge of the city. This would be University City down here. Market Street running through the center of the picture. Baltimore Avenue. And Cobb's Creek Park was created in the early 20th century. It was one of the valley parks created to protect the streams, various streams, Tacony Creek Park, Pennypack Park, Pequotting Park. They were all land purchased by the city or given to the city to protect the streams. But it really doesn't protect the stream much when you don't buy up the whole watershed, because now all the storm sewers just flow into here when it rains. And there's, of course, here's an earlier photograph just showing how early this kind of development was completed. Here again is 63rd Street in Philadelphia, looking east down Market Street here, and then Upper Darby and 69th Street at the bottom left. So it doesn't really, it certainly helps some, but it doesn't help the water quality in the creek that much when you don't keep all the stormwater out of it in rainy times. And so this is just things you all probably know if you're aware of. The problem with urban streams is, you know, all the tributaries are gone, so and all the woods are gone. No water is infiltrating into the ground anymore. So any springs that would have existed have dried up, and all the impervious surface just causes runoff. And you see the flooding in Darby and in Upper Darby, even from Naylor's Run, that's caused a lot of, occasionally when we get heavy rain. And then the stream flow is lower during dry times and really flashy, higher during the rainy times. So it's just one of the many consequences of this putting streams into sewers, and that's where I'm going to end it. I don't know how long I've been talking, but probably too long. But because I would want to leave some time for some questions. So that's.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome. And I'll leave this. You can leave this slide up, or my website has a lot of information, and also the Philadelphia Water Department website. So should I unshare my screen, or?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to ask their question, it'll be easier to see them. There was a question in the comments I wanted to bring up. Dale Harris asked, is any of the water dumping into Darby Creek being treated at this time?
Darby Creek. The water, the Cobbs Creek water, or?
Yes.
Maybe Dale could speak up and clarify if he's still.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
The whole watershed.
Well, by treated, all the sewage is treated during dry weather. All the sewage is diverted from. But do you mean is the water in Cobbs Creek treated?
Well, the sewage is diverted, you're saying?
Yeah, it's diverted to sewage treatment plant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
Could
part
you
of.
hear that what's being combined with the stormwater?
Well, during I see my friend Dan Shupsky there. Maybe he wants to give a brief answer to this. That combined sewer overflows in the Cobb.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Dan Shupsky. I'm with the Water Department. I do outreach in West Philly. We work with Adam a bunch. Like Adam was saying, 2/3 of Philadelphia is a combined sewer. The combination is stormwater and wastewater. Unfortunately, the sewers are not big enough to handle the volume of stormwater runoff. And then, like Adam was saying, the more and more developed the area gets, the more stormwater runs off roofs, driveways, sidewalks, things like that. And so that is the combination, right? And when the sewer gets too full, whatever is in that pipe will overflow. The relief valves were made directly into local waterways by engineers a couple hundred years ago. So they solved one or two problems 200 years ago and created 2 or 3 modern problems.
Well, it was about 100 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, apologies. I'll put an animation that we helped develop about the combined sewer overflows in the chat. Adam, I've been putting a bunch of links in the chat.
Okay, good.
So good to see
could I ask a question?
Yeah.
About what year did they uncombine the sewer and the runoff?
Well, they
I mean,
didn't.
like, for example, Upper Darby, that's a later development. Are they combined there also?
I'm not sure. I probably, someone else might be able to answer that, but in
Is
Philadelphia,
Darren still online? Darren, do you want to answer that? Because to my understanding, all of Delaware County and Darby Creek Watershed has combined sewers.
I give you one example. I happened to be at a start of a rainstorm at the old waterworks, and the overflow that came out right below the waterworks was quite disgusting smelling.
Waterworks in Philadelphia.
Yeah, into the Schuylkill. It was unbelievable how, I mean, 15 minutes into the rainstorm, it was a heavy rain, and you could see the trash and the slime, and the smell was horrible.
Yeah, well, that's a combined sewer overflow that happens. And there's about 200 combined sewers in Philadelphia. Some of them, I don't know how many into Cobb's and Indian Creek, but and during rain, that's what happens. And Dan probably put a link to the Green City Clean Waters program, which is the Philadelphia's way of trying to keep water out of the sewers during storms, which would lessen the amount of those overflows. And we're under mandate, like every city with combined sewers, to try to do something to control them and to lessen them. And we've done it by creating green spaces to capture the water, or just various infrastructure, but mostly just if you go to the chat and look at that, look at some of those links, you know, they'll explain that a little more. But yes, that's a combined sewer overflow. And during dry weather, all the sewage goes to sewage treatment plants. But during wet weather, you know, and it's not predictable, and it's less and less over time as our program to control these things, you know, continues. But there still are these overflows. So it's an unfortunate artifact of this 19th century way of building a city, and not really being concerned about any environmental concerns. And to the engineers' credit, when they originally came up with combined sewers, as
can you get hamburger buns later?
they
Scratch
didn't
them off the list. I don't know why.
they didn't understand about they didn't understand about bacteria. So they just thought that those odors that you were smelling at the waterworks were what was causing disease. So they were trying to get that disease-smelling odor out of the neighborhoods. So they thought they were doing the right thing. They were actually doing they were doing something different. There were a lot of consequences from that I get into in the other longer talk I give about this. But the combined sewer overflows are one of them.
Yeah, hi, this is Darren. I'm going to chime in for just a minute here. The biggest movement towards separating stormwater from sewage happened as a result of the Clean Water Act. In the 1970s, we built thousands of wastewater treatment plants to take care of our liquid waste from our houses and businesses. Prior to that, everybody just had a pipe that went into the closest creek. And I actually remembered this a short time ago when I was talking to a friend of mine in Lower Gwinnett Township back in the very late 70s, like 78, 79. I was working as a surveyor right after I graduated from high school, and we were surveying over there because they were putting in a sewer line. And I was cautioned not to step in the ditch along the side of the road because all the homes had a straight pipe coming out to the ditch, which flowed down the side of the road and went into the creek. So we have in, I wish I knew the date, but I believe it was around the turn of the century that, or probably in the early 1900s, that Haverford Township had a wastewater treatment plant that has since been decommissioned and connected it up so that all the wastewater from Haverford Township now goes to the West Philly plant and Delcora for treatment. I do know from some other work that I've done that one of the earliest wastewater treatment plants or wastewater authorities that I ever encountered was the Atlantic City Sewerage Company, which was incorporated in I think it's 88, it could be 89, but 1888, to collect the wastewater from the city of Atlantic City and treat it at a wastewater treatment plant. And I can't find aerial photographs from that far back, but the oldest ones that I can find, you can clearly see a wastewater treatment plant. And mostly back then, it was removing the sludge and land applying that and letting the water flow into the closest water body. So not a terribly sophisticated wastewater treatment process. But the one problem that we do continue to have with our separate systems is when there are incorrect connections to it, where someone during construction makes an error and pipes stormwater into a wastewater pipe, and it overwhelms the system. And you can't flood out a sewage lift station, or it shuts down and you don't get the water going to the wastewater treatment plant where it needs to go. So there are relief points in all of these separate systems where if there's an overwhelming amount of wastewater coming in, it overflows untreated into the water body. So just for everyone's information, please make sure that you don't have any stormwater discharges or sump pumps going into the sewer system. It's just a bad practice. It results in overflows of untreated wastewater from the separate system. So that's all I'll say. I just wanted to add a little bit of additional information. This has been an excellent talk. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I don't know how many people are still here, but did someone look at the questions that are posted? I haven't.
I have a quick one. The recent flooding in Upper Darby, do they have any, I guess there's no quick answers, but any long-term plans? This has been going on for years and years.
Yeah, it's usually at 69. Was it at, I'm not sure, but I bet it was at 69th in Market, more or less, at the low point there.
It's the Nailers Run.
Yeah.
It's surface and then underneath, surface underneath.
Yeah, yeah. It's just one of those things that you know, if they had left Nailers Run, the Nailers Run watershed maybe a little bit more natural, not put it in a concrete channel. You think about, you know, a concrete channel. There's no. It's an either or situation. Either you're fine or it's overflowing. There's no place for it to spread out. So it's just until that kind of thing is changed. I mean, it's the same thing with the Schuylkill River, which is bulkheaded almost the entire length of it through Philadelphia. It's either fine or it's overflowing, you know, into the river drives or into the center city or wherever, you know. So anytime you have that, and it's the same thing that happens actually in Eastwick. I was going to try to talk about Eastwick today, but there just wasn't enough time. And as I developed that talk, which is will be a new one, a little bit more, you know, I'd be glad to come back and talk about that with this group, or let you know if I'm giving a talk, so you can check in on it. But in Eastwick, you know, Darby Creek flows. It's got a dike or a levee, and you know, as we know from New Orleans, when you have a levee, either it's on one side of the levee or it's on the wrong side. So there's no floodplain left to capture that high flow. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what plans Upper Darby has, but probably it's one of these problems that, you know, I'm probably going to anger someone who lives in that valley, but it'd probably be cheaper for them in the long run to buy people out who get flooded time after time than to try to fix it, try to build some infrastructure that's going to fix the flooding.
Thanks.
I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I wrote it down, but I live near Clark Park, and with all the talk about Mill Creek, I was curious if you could talk a little bit about what we call the bowl in Clark Park, which we assumed was Mill Creek Pond.
Yeah, there were two mill ponds.
Yeah.
In that lower part of Mill Creek. One was on the upper pond, which was filled in. Actually, they used it as a garbage dump for years until they finally filled it in, and then by 1912 they were able to cover it over with soil and plant it. But the lower part, which is the bowl, I call it the biggest sledding hill in University City.
Yeah.
It's you know, that was never filled in, so that is sort of representing maybe the original level of that pond, and maybe but it actually might be more the original level of the ground, and the pond might have been deeper. They might have filled it in some, because the sewer, the original level of the sewer is probably about 30 feet below the street at that point. So that would be where the stream would have been. But
Okay. Yeah.
I have one more question. The brick sewers that they built back then, I'm guessing they inspect them every so often. How are they holding up?
well, you know, in the other talk I talk about that. Originally they were not holding up very well. You know, the Romans seem to have been able to build masonry structures that lasted thousands of years, but somehow in the 1900 years between the time the Romans built them and the time we started building these big sewers, we forgot how to build them, forgot the proper mortar to use, or at least we're not inspecting them properly. In the corruption of the 19th century, you know, public works, you know, they were built cheaply, and the Mill Creek sewer, for example, caved in before they even finished it, you know, parts of it, and other sewers the same thing. So all of these sewers have now, where they've needed to be, have been completely rebuilt over the past 100 years. And the inspections are usually done based on problems. You know, 3,000 miles of sewer pipes, and only so many inspectors. So where there's subsidence above, or where there's subsidence in somebody's yard or in the street, then they go out and inspect. So it's a little hard to inspect all of those pipes every year, or even every 5 years. So we try to, where there's problems with odors or subsidence, that's where generally where the inspectors are directed.
Thanks.
I don't think I see any other questions in the chat. If I missed any, I know Robin had a question, which Dan sent some links as an answer. So I don't know if that's fully answered, or if Robin, you want to speak up, you can, or anyone else. If I missed your question.
No, thanks for those links.
Is there a way to print? Is there a way to print out?
Yeah, thanks for talking. Enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for spending such a nice day at your computer.
There is, were you asking about the chat?
Yeah,
there is a
could.
way you can save the chat. I've been recording the links that were shared so that I could email them out along with the webinar recording afterwards.
Okay, if you could do that, that would be, Dan.
Yep.
Hey, just very quickly, someone asked me in a private chat here if I would ever swim in the Darby Creek. And I will just say I want to answer this publicly very quickly. And Adam, you can feel free to weigh in. I would not swim in any urban body of water after it had rained. And I would be extra careful if I were to swim in some body of water if it hadn't rained. And I would only go in there if, like, someone needed help, or my dog couldn't get out of the creek or something like that. So just my recommendation, be very careful. Overflows happen all the time. And
Yeah, if we're talking about lower Darby Creek or Cops Creek through the city or through upper Darby, then I agree with Dan. I wouldn't even swim in the Schuylkill up in Schuylkill Haven when I took a canoe trip down from there. Because there's sewage treatment plants all up and down all the rivers, and even some of the smaller creeks where you wouldn't expect them. So, but that might come from working for the water department. So
I live just off of Ridley Creek, about half a mile from Media's treatment plant. Now, I don't know, the creek smells different above and below that plant. So
yeah, well, the effluent smells like sewage effluent, and it smells like soapy and laundry detergent. And you can always tell, and you probably know, living below that there is a different smell, and it's not gonna give you diseases because they chlorinate it all usually to kill any bacteria that's in it, but it's still not. It doesn't make for nice recreation, and at least to immerse yourself in it, in my opinion. But we probably should cut that out of the video because I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying stuff like that from somebody.
hey, if they're swimming in there with or without that knowledge, they probably should have to deal with what they're going to get.
Yeah. I mean, people do swim in urban streams all the time. You know, kids who grow up in the city, especially in neighborhoods where they don't have access to pools, they'll jump in the Delaware River. They'll jump in, not so much the Schuylkill, but the Delaware anyway. And they seem to survive. At least that's what I've been told. I mean, by the people who told me they're alive. So, you know, they didn't have 3 ears or 10 fingers on one hand or whatever. So, you know, we have done a good job of cleaning up the rivers and streams, you know, because of what someone was saying earlier with the Clean Water Act and the sewage treatment, but there still is the problem with sewage effluent and overflows. So.
Well, I have one quick story for you. My parents used to take us to a place we called Sandy Beach, which was down behind the airport, and we'd swim in the Delaware, and that was probably early to mid 60s, and I have 2 eyes and 10 fingers. So okay. Go figure.
Yeah, there you go. Well, the Delaware, yep, and you were, we were treating sewage by then, so.
It wasn't clean. I can remember things washing up that shouldn't have been in there.
Yeah, well, that still happens, so.
Thanks. Nice talk.
Thank you.
Adam, I just had my own quick question, if you don't mind. You mentioned the West Branch of Indian Creek being the only daylighting project that you knew of in the area. Is there like a movement towards daylighting at all that you've seen? Is this something that people are considering, or is it?
No, because with a combined, think about the valleys that I showed in some of those photographs, and then think about trying to daylight the stream that's at the bottom of the sewer that now carries the stream. You'd have to tear down, you know, to recreate a valley, you'd have to tear down a lot of houses. You'd have to remove all the fill. I mean, you could take the street off and the lid off the sewer, but then you basically have an open sewer running down the middle of the street. And that's not what daylighting usually is. Daylighting usually occurs where streams enter a city as a living stream and then leave the city as a living stream and don't have sewage going into them. And in Philadelphia, most of the streams that enter the city and enter sewer never see the light of day again. And so it's like it would be possible maybe to, if like sections of Mill Creek, if they wanted to daylight they wanted to tear down the Overbrook train station, tear down apartment, you know, I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but there's just no way that with all the development that's gone on, based on the fact that the stream is now a sewer under the street, that it's going to be possible. And to add to that then you'd have to, you know, stormwater could go into that daylighted stream, but then you'd have to still build a whole new system to collect the sewage and deal with that. So
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
You're talking about daylighting. If you're familiar with Naylor's Run, we talked
Yeah.
about. So it starts roughly at State and Lansdowne, goes underground, and then in I forget the name of the park behind Prendy and Bonner. It's open, and then it opens again for a little bit and goes underground. Any particular reason why it would open for little sections like that, other than parkland?
That probably has to do with the developer who probably encouraged that, McClatchy, who built half of Delaware County, it seems. But I have no idea what the engineering idea was behind covering it over and uncovering it. So that's an example of a stream that could be daylighted. But again, that's in a concrete channel, so you'd still have, if you daylighted it, you would want to create some kind of natural looking something there. You could take the lids off of that, and because it is a living stream. And if you created some kind of wetlands around there, then it might relieve some of the flooding farther downstream. But it's not likely that Upper Darby Township has the money to do any of that, or even the desire. So.
Okay, I think that about wraps us up there, Adam. Thank you so much. That was very informative, and appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, we are recording, and we'll send that out, and I'll include the links that Dan was sending out in the chat, so everyone will have access to that. And I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.